going to start it out from the base. Okay, the schus of our learning should have the base of Mikdash. Should be our first name also for Yechiel Nasim and Sarah. But anyone else needs our first name. So we're starting on Yud Aleph on the base. It's sort of a little above the middle of the page. Lema Ketanai. Yeah, maybe it's about 15 lines down, between 15 and 20 lines down. What happened before is we had a machlekes between Rav and Shmuel. And it was regarding two things. It was one halacha regarding two things. Tasav le'manasi. You're not allowed to make the sukkah kosher after it's already made. Well, you're not allowed. The sukkah doesn't become kosher after it's already made. You have to make it kosher initially. In other words, you set up the walls, and then you put on the schach. What you're not supposed to do is put on non-kosher schach, or put on kosher schach and set up the walls, put on non-kosher schach and then somehow make it kosher afterwards by cutting separating it from its source or something like that. Oh well, that's a good problem. Okay, so we had a machlekes between Rav and Shmuel. Originally, it was a conversation between Rav Yosef and Rav Huna. Rav Yosef said that Rav said that you have to, after you cut it, you have to shake the schach. After you cut the vine, you have to shake the schach. And Rav Huna said Rav never said that. That was something Shmuel said. Rav holds that once you cut it, it's considered like you made it. K'tzitzasan zuhi asiyasan. That's considered making it. And the same thing would apply to tzitzis. If tzitzis were made and they were still attached, the strings were still looped, and then you cut it, Rav says, okay, that's making it. Shmuel says, no. Untie the whole thing and retie it. Cutting it is not making it. You're just making it kosher, but you're not making it. Leimiketanoi. Let's begin. Let's say that the machlekes Rav and Shmuel is actually an earlier machlekes. This bothers us. Leimiketanoi. We don't like when Amirayim are arguing about the same thing that Tanaim were arguing about. If they wanted to say that they hold like a certain opinion, say you hold like that opinion. But don't make up like as if this is a new machlekes, if it was already argued about 100 years or 200 years earlier. Let's say that this machlekes Rav and Shmuel is really an earlier machlekes. Avar belikdan pasal, Reb Shimon bar Yitzadek, Chamim Machshir. This is talking about is the hadassim, the myrtle branches. Myrtle branches that have berries on them. So if there's more berries than leaves, so then it's pasal. There's the little berries that grow on it. Not very good. Yeah, there's a picture in the title. So what you can do is you can remove the berries. But on Yom Tov, you're not allowed to remove the berries because you're masakin mana, you're fixing it. You can't make it kosher you can't fix it on Yom Tov. Let's say someone did. So Reb Shimon ben Yitzadek says it's possible. And the Chum say it's kosher. Okay, so we're going to claim that this machlekes Reb Shimon bar Yitzadek and the Chachamim is really the same machlekes as Rav and Shmuel later on. So Savrua, they thought to explain the Kuli al Malulav Tzarech Egen. Everyone holds that a lulav needs to be tied. Tied means that you put those lulav branches around it. You don't just take all four species, just random, and just bring them together. You actually have to tie three of them together. Lulav Tzarech Egen. The lulav needs to be bound. Bi'alfina lulav misukah. And then we would learn the lulav from sukkah. What does it say by sukkah? That tasav le'manasi, that you have to make the sukkah and not make it kosher later on after it's made. So here, what would you have done? You have taken the hadassim. You tie it together with the lulav. Hadassim were possible because they had too many berries on them. Then you pull the hadassim, you pull the berries off it. You make it kosher after it's made. That's a problem with Tasa B'Lei Menaseh. Except Gabi Sukkah, Tasa, and we learn from that B'Lei Menaseh. And so my love, Bakamiflagi. And so what would the machlekes be? Man, the one that says that it's kosher, which was the Chachamim, Savar Amin and Gabi Sukkah, Kitzitzas and Zui Yasiyasin. They say that regarding the sukkah, we say that cutting the branch off from its source is considered making the sukkah, not just making it kosher, but it's making the sukkah. And picking the berries off the hadassim is also considered that you're making it now. So in other words, it's not just making it kosher, it's more than making it kosher, it's actually making it. That would be the opinion of Rav. So Rav would hold like the Chachamim. Among the puzzle, the one that says that it's puzzle to collect the berries on Yom Tov, or not to puzzle to collect. It's usher to collect, but after you collect it, it remains puzzle. Man the puzzle savar le'amrin gabi sukkah kitzitzas and yasin. He holds that when it comes to a sukkah, we don't say that cutting it is considered making the sukkah. By the lulav also, we don't say that picking the berries is considered making it. So in other words, there's a machlekes here. If something is puzzle, but you do a major action to make it kosher, is that considered that you just made it kosher, or does that consider that you made it entirely? So Rav says it's considered like you made it entirely, and that would be the opinion of the Chachamim. When you pick the berries, it's like you made it entirely. It's like you just tied it now. And Reb Shimon Bar Yochai holds like in Shmuel would hold the same opinion that cutting the schach and picking the berries is not making it entirely. You're just making it kosher. It was already made, and that's a problem. Making it kosher is a problem. You have to make it originally kosher. So this would be a lema ketanai. The Gemara says like, nice try, but that's not necessarily the machlekes. Why? Because they have so many other ways to explain this machlekes between Reb Shimon Bar Yochai and the Chachamim. By the way, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai is sometimes confused with the Rashbi. We have sometimes contradictions between things that the Rashbi says. And it turns out that one of the sources was not really the Rashbi, it was Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. We have that in a contradiction between brachas and menachas. One place it says that you're only allowed to study Torah. Another place it says you only have to study Torah to 1 hour a day, one perek a day. And it's a contradiction, both from the Rashbi. So the Shach in Yerdea says, he quotes the Gemara in Menachos, and he says, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, which resolves the whole issue. It's not Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. So, Taisus over here mentions that Reb Shimon Bar Yochai is a Tana. He's not the one that was walking together with Rish Lakish, Masechta Sanhedrin. Rish Lakish criticized Reb Shimon Bar Yochai and the person that was walking with him. What was his name? Forgot his name. They were walking together, and Rish Lakish saw people that were doing things that he thought was not acceptable, and they were giving excuses for the people. So Rish Lakish didn't approve of them. That would not be this Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. Apparently, Taisus is saying that there's two Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. All right, whatever the case is, he says, "Like that's not the machlekes between Rav and Shmuel. That's not the machlekes between Rav and Shmuel is clear. That's the machlekes between Reb Shimon Bar Yochai and the Chachamim. There's a different logic behind this regarding picking berries off the hadassim on Yom Tov. It says the Kuli al Malayim Ninan Gabi Sukkah Kitzitzas Zui Yasiyasin. Everyone holds that when you're cutting the schach from the sukkah, no one says that if you cut it, that's like you made it. Everyone says that if you cut it, and the schach is attached to the ground. If you detach it from the ground, no one says that's making it. Everyone just says that's just making it kosher. Here the question is, do we have the halachas of sukkah applied to the lulav? The sukkah, we have a rule of passive alay menaseh, that you have to make it kosher initially. Do we say the same thing by a lulav? Man de machshir, one that says that even after I tie the lulav together, and I still have the berries attached. And then you remove the berries later, so it's kosher. By sukkah, you have the halacha that you have to tie it, if not tie it, that you have to build it initially kosher, and you can't make it kosher later. But by the lulav, you can make it kosher later. Even if after you tied it, you can still pick the berries off and make it kosher. Among the puzzle, but the one that says that it's puzzle, which is Reb Shimon Bar Yitzchak. I'm sorry. Savar Yalfin lulav misukah, that we learn lulav from sukkah, and they both need to be made initially kosher, and that's why it's not valid here. By the same way, you can explain this mach like this another way. You know what? If you actually had to tie the lulav, everyone would agree that you have a problem in your hands. You tied it and it wasn't kosher. The only thing is, the alfina lulav misukah, that everyone would agree that you learn lulav from sukkah, that it needs to be kosher initially. But the machlekes here is slightly different. The machlekes is mar savar tzarech heged and mar savar ein tzarech heged. One opinion holds the lulav doesn't need to be tied. So what did you do already? You made it kosher before. You made it kosher after you did what? Tied it. It doesn't need to be tied. You can always make it kosher. Always pull off the berries. If there's an action, an asiyah, that would be the tying of it, then you would have to make it kosher before you tied it. But he holds you don't have to tie it. So what did you do when you tied it? Nothing. So you made it kosher. There's no making over here. There's no tasa. You just take the four species and you bring them together. And if you don't believe me, there's actually a machlekes. An earlier machlekes, if a lulav needs to be tied. The Tanya was taught in a brayso, lulav bein agud bein she'eina agud kosher. A lulav, whether it's tied or whether it's not tied, is kosher. Rabbi Yehuda Aimer agud kosher she'eina agud pasol. Rabbi Yehuda says no, only if it's tied, it's a kosher. Sometimes we forget to tie it before sukkahs. It's always a shiloh. What do you do? Because how do we pass them? That it needs to be tied. I'm not sure. But we definitely, on Yom Tov, the problem is on Yom Tov, you're not supposed to make a knot. So what they do is they just put the ring around it without tying it into a knot, without going back over and looping it, without knotting it. So the Gemara now says, my time with the Rabbi Yehuda. What's the reason why Rabbi Yehuda says that it needs to be tied? It doesn't say in the Torah that you have to tie your lulav. It says, Yalaf lakicha me'aguda seizev. Very interesting. It says by aguda seizev, the bundle of hyssop that they used to paint the doorpost with blood from Korban Pesach in Egypt. It says, lakachtem aguda seizev. You should take a bundle of hyssop, grass. And over here it says, it says you should take for you on the first day. Referring to the lulav, first day of Sukkot. Just like over there, it's a bundle. Right, the Aguda says it's tied. The hyssop is tied together. Afkan, also the lulav is tied. That's Rabbi Yehuda's view. We learn that it's tied from Gzer Shabbat. But Rabbanan lakicha layalfina. The Rabbanan don't learn lakicha. Places points out they do learn kicha mistayefren. Gemara Kedushin says how 3 ways a woman can get married. One of them is with money. We use a ring. Where do you learn that from? We learn that kicha. We learn that money acquires. We learn it from Avraham Avinu when he bought the grave. It says it's a sada kachmi mani or something like that. So even though the Rabbanan don't learn kicha, Taisus points out they just still learn that money works for marriage and for buying. So yeah, biblically. Okay, so Rabbanan lakicha layalfinan. They don't learn lakicha, and therefore a lulav doesn't need to be tied. Now we have a problem. We have a brisa that doesn't seem to fit with either opinion. The brisa says like this: lulav mitzvah la'agdei. It's a mitzvah to tie the lulav. V'im la'agdei, but if you didn't tie it, kasha. It's kosher. Rabbi Yehuda ki la'agdei my kasha. If it's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, why is it kosher if you didn't tie it? Rabbanan, if it's the rabbi's opinion, am I mitzvah? Then why is it a mitzvah to tie it? They don't have the Gezer Shava. There's no reason to tie it. Just take all four, right? And just bring them together. It says, Le'oila Rabbanan, really, this is the rabbi's opinion. Rabbanan, everyone agrees it's nicer if it's tied. According to this, what this price is saying is that Hiddur Mitzvah. You should tie it for Hiddur Mitzvah. Not because there's any obligation to tie it, just because it's nicer to tie. So mitzvah like that, it's a mitzvah to make it nicer. And then from Zekeli on Veyu is the word on Veyu is being translated Snoah, like make nice. I will make him nice with mitzvahs. Rashi says Sukka na, lulav na, tzitzis na. Yeah. It's brought. This is a pasuk from Oz Yasher, and it's telling me that you have to do Hiddur Mitzvah. General statement. Yeah, Rashi and Sukkah says that you should have a talis knot. Here it says tzitzis knot, nice strings, right? And Rashi and Sukkah says you have a nice talis for the strings. Yeah, other people say jokingly that you should also have a nice house for your mezuzah, but a nice car for your tefillas haderech.
It says kalana.
Oh, kalana, right. Uh-huh. Okay. Beautiful. Okay. Zaklal, called over some makabel tumah. We learned in the Mishnah that anything that's makabel tumah, anything that is susceptible to impurity, is not good for schach. It also needs. We also learned that it needs to grow from the ground. Those are the rules. We learned also that it needs to be detached from the ground. That was the cases that it brought. But the two zehaklal was it needs to be. It can't be makabel tumah, and has to grow from the ground. Hani mili. The Gemara asks right away. What's our source? Rish Lakish says there's a pasuk. The Eidi Alam and Aretz. In the mist will rise up from the ground. Talking about in Bereshis. It's by the garden. Cloud went up and it watered the garden. Just like the mist, the cloud, the fog, right? It went up. It's not makabel tumah. If you touch it, the cloud doesn't become tummy. The person's tummy or it touches him. B'gidulei minaret, and it arises from the ground. Also, the sukkah needs to come up from the ground, and it can't be makabel tumah. 1 second. Hanicha, Naftali's surprised. Hanicha lamanda maranani covered haya. If you say, why do we sit in a sukkah, is to commemorate the clouds of glory. Because we were in clouds of glory in the desert. God protected us when we came out of Egypt. But if the source of the sukkah, why are we celebrating sukkah? There's two possibilities. Either because there were clouds of glory that surrounded us. So to commemorate that, we have a sukkah. Or we say that when we were coming out of Egypt, we built sukkahs. When did we build sukkahs? I saw, it's a medrash that they lost the Anania covered after the Egel. They had to build sukkahs, real sukkahs, to protect them from the heat. So until they were forgiven, I guess. So that's when they would have had sukkahs. So they built sukkahs. Now, if you say that sukkahs are commemorating the clouds, so there's a cloud, just like a cloud is not makabel tumah, and it grows up from the ground, it arises from the ground. So also schach should not be makabel tumah and has to grow from the ground. But if you say that they built sukkahs, what does that have to do with the cloud? What does it have to do with the mist? Nothing to do with the mist. The Tanya was taught in a brisa. Keep a sukkahs, Bnei Yisrael, because in sukkahs I caused the Jewish people to dwell. Anani covered hayu. Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkenes. He says, Rabbi Elazar Gadol, he says that it's because of the clouds of glory. And Rabbi Akiva Sukkos Mamash Asalem, Rabbi Akiva says it was actual sukkahs. If it's actual sukkahs, so what's the miracle? What are we celebrating? So we're celebrating Pesach twice. We're celebrating Yetzias Mitzrayim. We celebrate it in the spring, we celebrate it in the fall. How do we celebrate it in the spring? We eat matzahs. How do we celebrate it in the fall? We sit in sukkahs. If it's but if it's the Anania covered, then we're celebrating an independent miracle. Then the Mefarshim ask, why don't we celebrate also the man? Why don't we celebrate the water? If you're going to celebrate all the different miracles of the desert, yeah. But otherwise, it's just a celebration of Yetzias Mitzrayim, according to Rabbi Akiva.
Well, it's also the period after Yetzias Mitzrayim, right? Pesach is the actual leaving Egypt, and the one is the years.
Yeah, the question is, what would the miracle be? It would be the process, right? Yeah.
But when we say Matov Alecha Yaakov, okay, so there was Anania Yaakov, let's say, but they were still living in homes, right? What kind of tents were those? They were.
Very interesting. You want to say Matayvu Sukhasecha Yaakov? Yeah, I don't know. It's a good point. What you're saying is that you don't have to say my pshat that they lost the Anania covered after this Egel. That's what you're saying. So it could have been the whole time that they had sukkahs together in the clouds of glory themselves. They were floating with sukkahs.
Yeah.
Okay. So we don't have a pshat on what's the source of not mekabel tuma, not being susceptible to impurity, which means basically it's not a vessel. And we don't have a source for it growing from the ground. Kiyasa Rabdimi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabdimi was a traveler. He brought halachas in the name of Rabbi Yochanan Amar Kra. It says in the pasuk, Chag HaSukkos Taselecha. The holiday of Sukkot should make for you. Makir Sukkah lechagiga. We're going to compare the Sukkah to Chag. Chag HaSukkos. We'll compare it to the carbon chagiga. We did this once before. Ma chagiga davar sheinu mekabel tuma v'gedula minar. It's just like an animal is not mekabel tuma while it's alive. And gidulei minaretz, and it also grows from the ground. Why does it grow from the ground? Because it eats grass. So it grows from the ground. It grows from what grows from the ground. Also, the sukkah has to be something that's not susceptible to impurity, and it grows from the ground. The Gemara asks, 1 second. But you know what this is going to leave you with? That you can use animal hides for schach. It would work quite well. But it can't be tanned already, because once it's tanned, it would be considered leather, it would be mekabel tuma. Well, I don't know. But untanned hides you would be allowed to use for schach. It would be waterproof. So, and that the Gemara is surprised by that, because we never said that. So it says Kiyasa Ravin. Ravin was also a traveler. He came after Rav Dimi. He said, what Rav Dimi brought, I don't know about that. Rabbi Yochanan said something else. It says that you celebrate the holiday of Sukkot at the time when you gather in from the granary, the threshing floor, and from the wine press. Yeah, if you would tan it, right, you would have to just take it off the animal, just the skin of an animal. And well, you'd have to perfume it. So, talking about you have to use the waste products that are left over from the threshing floor, which would be stalks of wheat that don't have the kernels in it anymore, and the twigs and peels that are left over from the wine press and the olive press. The Gemara says, how do you know? Maybe it actually means stalks, and maybe it actually means the grain itself and the wine itself. It says Yaakov. Maybe with the stalks of wheat, you can use them for schach, even though, while they're in the kernel, on the stalk, in the head of the stalk, you could put it up there. But the wine, if you pour your wine up as schach, it's just going to fall right through your thing. It's going to fall on the floor. It's impossible. So it must be it's the waste of the wine, not the wine itself. It must be it's the waste products of the grain, not the grain itself, because it can't be possible to be the wine itself. So by the grain also, it can't be possible to be the grain. Maskefler Reb Yirmiyah. Reb Yirmiyah has a question. It says, what about that congealed wine? It comes from a place called Sneer. And over there, they have these wine, solid pieces of wine. I guess you put it into water and you dilute it and something, you drink it down. Yeah, on the go. It's freeze dried. So they have somehow this solid wine that you can use for schach. That's gonna be your whole proof is that you can't find wine that's solid. There is such a thing. They used to do it. Yeah, this sounds like a good business. Amar Reb Zera, Hamel Sava Biyad Master Reb Yirmiyah V'Shad Ben Naiga. Reb Zera says we had a good shot going. Reb Yirmiyah comes along and messes it up. He throws an axe into it because he came up with this idea of using solid wine. So that means we lost our shot. We had a shot that it has to be the waste. Reb Yirmiyah introduced this new thing and he messed it up. Okay. Rashi says, if you look at the word, it says migarncha. The mem means from, which means you're not using the whole thing, you're just using from what's left over. That's what it means. Not the Yaakov itself. From the Yaakov. And from the threshing floor, which means the waste. Rav Chisda, that's another pshat. In other words, what we're looking for here is a source that we're using vegetation that's not actual fruits for schach. Things that grow from the ground, but it can't be the fruit itself. Rav Zera says from here, Nehemiah comes back. They came to Eretz Yisrael, and it says they made a holiday of Sukkot that they didn't make since Yeshua. Maybe that was Pesach, but they celebrated the holiday of Sukkot. Anyway, he sends them to get schach. So it says, to Uahar, go to the mountain. Maybe Ali Zayas, bring olive branches. Vali Eitz Shemen. Sounds also like olive branches. Vali Hadas, branches of Hadas, of myrtle. Ali Tamarim, branches of figs. Vali Eitz Aves, and branches of myrtle. We said myrtle already. Eitz Aves means braided. Myrtle looks like it's braided because it has 3 leaves. It looks like a braid. It looks like a challah. So the Gemara asks, I know Hadas, I know Eitz Aves. It's the same thing. Myrtle and the braid. Amar Rav Chisda, Hadas Shaita l'Sukkah v'Eitz Aves l'Lulav. There's 2 types of myrtle. There's a myrtle that has all 3 leaves coming from the same spot, from the same level on the branch. That's going to be kosher for the lulav. But then there's another one which is called a hadas shaita, where one leaf is always a little bit above or a little bit below. It's not on the same level. Yeah, that's what the term shaita. Why are they calling it a shaita? They say, no, they're calling it a shaita because a shaita is a fool. He always does something a little bit different. Everything is okay, but it's just something is like a little bit off. It's not like everyone else. He changes it a little bit up, a little bit low. So that's what's going on. He said, we're seeing that the lulav needs a hadas and the schach needs a hadas. Now, it doesn't need actual hadas. It was just an example. But what we're saying is that the schach needs to be vegetation. Yeah. We're going to have a big discussion over here. If you want to add more hadassim, if you're allowed to add hadassim that are not perfectly kosher. You already have 3 kosher. Can you add an extra one? So here we're seeing that it's a different species. Each hadas shaita is like a different species. Nehemiah is telling them, or Ezra was telling them, it's quoted in Nehemiah. Ezra was telling them to get these species. Apparently, it's a different one. You're not allowed to have 5 species in your lulav. Yeah, it's a discussion. Okay, the Mishnah says, "Chavili kash, chavili yitzim, chavili zradim in mesachem bem. V'kulan sheitiran ksheris, v'kulan ksheris l'defanis." You can't use bundles of straw, bundles of wood, bundles of reeds. You can't use bundles for schach. You can't put it up as a bundle. You're allowed to use sticks, reeds. You're allowed to use wood. You're allowed to use straw, but you can't put it up as a bundle. If you open it up, it's fine, and you can use it for the walls. And you set up bundles for the walls all around your sukkah, but you can't put up bundles for schach. We'll see why. Amar Rabbi Yaakov, the Gemara says, Rabbi Yaakov says, Shamet minei de Rabbi Yochanan tarti. I heard 2 halachas and their reasons from Rabbi Yochanan. Chadaha, one halacha was the mission that we just cited. V'idach, the other halacha was achaytet begadish lasas sukkah. If someone hollows out a haystack, makes it like an igloo. I don't know, the igloo they set up with brick, right? They don't hollow it out. Here he has a haystack, and he goes in and he hollows out from inside, from the bottom, pulls it out, and then he crawls inside, and he says, "Look, I'm in a sukkah." So both of those are ein sukkah. Both our Mishnah is not a kosher sukkah, and the haystack is not a kosher sukkah. Chada, Rabbi Yochanan explained, one of them is not a kosher sukkah, mishum gzeira saitzer. It's a decree that you might think that you can use a storage place as a sukkah. They used to have to dry the wood. They would collect twigs, they would collect wood, and then they would use it for firewood. But you couldn't throw it right away into the fire. You had to let it dry in the sun. And then once it was dry, then it was good for firewood. Otherwise, it will smoke and it won't burn. So there was a process. It had to dry. So they would set it up to dry. So someone may think that I may set up things to dry, and I'm just going to go sit under it and say, "Oh, look, I'm in a sukkah." Sukkah is for shade or for the mitzvah, or just they used to say that it's I'm going to use a storage area because it happens to be wood, and I'll sit under it, and it's going to be kosher. So one of these halachas is a gzeira saitzer, and the other one is a real problem, not a decree. It's a biblical problem. You didn't make a sukkah. You made something else. You turn it into a sukkah later on. Okay. Rabbi Yaakov says, I don't know. There were 2 halachas here, the haystack and the bundles. Rabbi Yochanan said one of them is a biblical prohibition. Not a prohibition. A biblical invalidity. The other one is rabbinic. It's a gezeira. I don't know which one is which. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah says, we could figure this out on our own. Let's see. The Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Chia bar Abba was a major student of Rabbi Yochanan. Every 30 days, he reviewed all of the Rabbi Yochanan's teaching. Rabbi Yochanan would correct him. So he said over in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, why are you not allowed to use these bundles? It says, sometimes a person can come home from the field in the evening. What was he doing in the field? He was cutting wood. He has bundles on his shoulder. He throws it up on top of his sukkah in order to let it dry. That's a great spot for the sun. And then he says, you know what? I'm just going to leave it there. I'll use it as my schach. But Torah Amra Tasav Alei Menaseh, and the Torah says that that's not valid. Now, this Gemara is slightly confusing because the bundles in our Mishnah that he put up for schach is not Tasav Alei Menaseh. The bundles of our Mishnah he put up for schach, and we're saying that it's not valid. Why are bundles not valid for schach? Because sometimes a person comes home from the field and he puts it up for storage, and that's a problem of Tasav Alei Menaseh. That's really invalid. So therefore, whenever you use bundles, it's a gzeira that it might have been that you might use storage also. So the bundles is a problem of gzeira saitzer, midaham mishum gzeira saitzer. Since the bundles are a gzeira, bundles that you put up for schach, not bundles that you put up for storage. Bundles that you put up for storage are biblically invalid. Bundles that you put up for storage, bundles that you put up for schach are rabbinically not valid. Why? Because it's similar to the storage one. Since this is because of a gzeira saitzer, so back to the haystack, that must be mishum tasav alei menaseh. That's why you didn't put on the roof. The roof just appeared there because you hollowed it out. You have to make the sukkah. This became a sukkah after you hollowed it out. So the schach was already on top. The schach was already there before you hollowed it out. You have to put on the schach once there's walls. You did this the opposite way. You had the schach there, and then you made the walls by hollowing it out. Okay. It seems like so obvious what Rabbi Yirmiyah is saying. What was Rabbi Yaakov's question? Rabbi Yaakov hachter Rabbi Barava l'shmielei. Rabbi Yaakov never heard the statement from Rabbi Barava, Rabbi Yechanan's student. He didn't know about it. So he didn't have the information. Yeah. Yitzi would say he didn't get the memo. Okay. Amar Ravashi. Ravashi says, Atu chavili kash, chavili eitz mishum gezer seitzerika, mishum tasav alei menaseh leka, v'achaitet begadish mishum tasav alei menaseh leka, mishum gezer seitzerika. Ravashi has an interesting point. He says, look, I have two ways of learning the Mishnah of chavili kash. One is that we put it up for schach, and it's a gzeira. Other way is you put it up for storage, and it's a biblical issue. Tasav alei menaseh. I have two ways of learning hachaitet begadish. One is that you had a haystack and you hollowed it out. The other way is that I hollowed out a haystack and then I put the schach on top. It's very possible. Now, it's possible that when you make a haystack and then you hollow it out and you put the schach on top, it's possible that that's also a gezeira. That is possible, even though you did it correctly, but because it looks like you did it incorrectly, because that's how you could hollow it out also. You don't have to raise up the schach and put it. It's possible you happen to do it correctly, but it could be that there's a rabbinic law that makes it invalid. What's telling Rabbi Yochanan that our Mishnah of Chavili Kash bundles is you're putting it up for schach and it's only a rabbinic issue? The Mishnah of the haystack is a biblical issue. Maybe it's the opposite. Maybe the haystack was when you did it actually correctly, and there's a rabbinic issue over there. And chavili kash, chavili eitzim, chavili zradim is when you did it in the wrong way. You put it up for storage, and it's a biblical issue. Well, there's no compelling way to learn either way. And you're telling me this is the pshat. Each case has two options. Umar answers, Rabbi Yochanan Amalach, Rabbi Yochanan would respond, over here it just says, Ein mesachim, don't use it for schach. Lechatchila, hu dein mesachim, mishum gezer seitzer, ha daraisa shaperdami. It sounds like biblically it would be no problem. Hasam diktani ain't a sukkah, but over there it says it's not a sukkah. Chilu di'evet midaraisa nami ain't a sukkah. The expression is much stronger there. It's not a sukkah. It means it's a biblically invalid. That's the compelling reason why over there we're saying that it's a biblical issue of Tassel Leimanasi. Over here it's only a rabbinic issue. Okay. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav. Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Rav. Rav was a first generation Amira. Rabbi Yehuda would be a second. He says over an interesting halacha. There were two ways of making arrows. An arrow is a stick, and it has a head on it. The head was pointy. The stick was just what you used to hold the string back. So one way was that the head had a hollow in it, and the stick, you would put the stick into the head. The other way is that the stick was hollow, and the head had a point on it, and you would put the point into the stick. Right? Our hammers are a hollow metal. Right? You put the wood into the metal, and then they bang a nail, and it spreads it out. It holds it. At least that's the old hammers. So how do you term this? One is called a male arrow. One's called a female arrow. The male would be the point that goes into the hollow head, and the female would be a hollow stick. Okay. If it's a solid stick, that could be used for schach because it's not a receptacle. However, benekevas is psula. If the stick has a hollow in it for the head, the point on the head to go inside, so then that's called a female arrow stick. So that would be invalid. Why? Because theoretically it could be used to hold water. It has a hollow. It's a receptacle. This is, you mentioned the bamboo is in between the pieces, a hollow. So I don't know if that's a real issue. I don't know.
It seems like an arrow point seems like a pretty good kli also, no? Like as a knife or something.
Oh, the head, the actual head. Yeah, we're not using the head. The head is metal. We're using just the sticks, just the wood.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Gimel Tammuz, I went to New York with the yeshiva. So one bacher walking on the street, he finds a bullet. Okay, it turned out it was a full bullet. It was not used. Anyway, he put it into this thing. Is a bacher, what is he? Young kid. Anyway, comes to the airport. Oh my gosh, he was in such trouble. It's like, I found it. Yeah, right. What do you think? He had a lot of explaining. Anyway, okay. So yeah, arrows. We're talking about arrows for schach. So the Gemara says pshita. This seems to be obvious. 1 second. The Zacharim Kshera is pshita. If it's a male arrow, so then it's obvious. There's no receptacle there. We said, well, 1 second. It looks very similar to other arrows. The female arrows. Should say that there's a gzeira, you're not allowed to use arrows. So Kamash Malan, that we don't have such a gzeira. It's a chiddush. In the cave psula pshita, the other arrows, it's obvious. That's a receptacle. It says, Ma, the tema base kibbel asilamales. Leishme kibbel. You see, this is an interesting base kibbel. It's a receptacle, but it's actually filled because you put the arrowhead in it. So maybe it's not considered a real receptacle. Usually it's something you empty it out, a cup. You empty it out, you refill it, it's used. But over here, this is just in the beginning of the process. You're actually going to fill it and never take the head out. I mean, you shoot it, and that's it. Kamash Malan is coming to tell me that it's still considered a receptacle, even though it's going to be filled permanently. Amar Rabba Bar Bachanam Rab Yechanan Sicha Banitzi Pishtem Psula, Behutzne Pishtem Kshera. Anitze Pishtan is combed flax. Flax becomes linen, so it grows from the ground. The problem is, at a certain stage of the process, it's considered the material already, and you can't use the material. So combed flax is a problem, But the stalks of flesh, hutzne pishtan, that's kosher. As it's growing, it wasn't soaked. What they would do, the process was, they would cut the flax, they would soak it in water, they would beat it, and the fibers would separate, and then they would comb it. So once it's combed, it's for sure no good. Hushni pishtan, when it comes to hushni pishtan, any idea mahu, I don't know what the halach is. But guess what? Hushni atzman, any idea. But I also don't know what hushni are. Manavshach. I don't know the halacha, and I don't know what it is. And now, there's the other versions to this Gemara. I dayak v'lei nafetz. Is it beaten, but not combed, but it's already soaked? Hushni karilei. That's where I have a doubt. Aval tari v'lei dayak hutzni karilei. But if it was soaked, but not beaten yet, then that would be called hutzni. And hutzni, we said before, was kosher. So soaked flax had no problem. Dilma, or maybe hushni is talking about tari v'lei dayak. Maybe it's the soaked flax and not beaten yet. And nami hushni karilei. And that's the one that we don't know. Basically, we're left with a question here, soaked flax. We don't use flax that's hushni, because we don't know what the halacha is. But we don't know if hushni is soaked or just beaten. Okay. Amar Rav Yehuda, Hani Shushi v'Shvatzri, Mesachim. Rav Yehuda says that you're allowed to use Shushi and Shvatzri. Amin Gavix. I don't know what it is. One translation said it's licorice and something else. I don't know. What did they say? Any translation? Wormwood. I don't know. Wormwood and licorice. Abaya Amar b'Shushi Mesachrin b'Shvatzi le Mesachrin. Abaya says you can use Shushi. Shushi is the licorice or the wormwood. Abaya says you can use the Shushi. But don't use Shvatzri. Why? My timer. Even the sari rechayu shavaklu v'nafik. Because it smells so bad, it's not a problem of the branches. It's not considered a vegetable. It's not considered that it's something edible. It's wood. Yeah, licorice. I mean, you can cook it and turn it into tea. You can soak other things in it, right? They have licorice tea, but you don't really eat it. It's like cinnamon sticks. Well, cinnamon sticks you do eat. You grind it up. It is cinnamon powder. But over here, sari rechai, over here, it's going to smell and you're going to leave. That's probably the wormwood. Licorice probably smells good, black licorice. Amar Rav Chanan bar Rava, Hani hizmi v'higi mesachim. You can use this hizmi v'higi. These are types of bushes. You can use this for schach. Abayam b'hizmi mesachim v'higi le mesachim. Don't use higi. Why? My time, the natri terfayo shavaklu v'nafik. The leaves fall and they become very uncomfortable to sit in this sukkah with the leaves falling down, and they get into your everything. Yeah, like those things that they throw on Tisha B'Av. This year they didn't throw them. No, we had an easy time. They used to throw these things that would get stuck in your beard and on your clothing. Okay, let's leave it over here. We're on Daf Gimel on 5 lines from the top.
I have a question. So if you build a sukkah that has